Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we are going to get into pixel art or 8-bit style animations or looks inside of Cinema 4D. So this is a pretty awesome workflow. I've been having a lot of fun with it. Here's one of my favorite little dudes. It's my little robot guy doing the robot dance. Love this guy. But he's like super pixelated and like very 8-bit-y. 8-bitty. And then we also have the most recognizable mushroom in the world. That's the Super Mario mushroom guy. And it's also an 8-bit style. I kind of say it's like maybe a PlayStation kind of style. I'm going to relate to all these styles in like video game terms. But you can see we still have the shading, some nice shading and specular and stuff like that on here. And this is going to be a really cool workflow for like 2D game designers or people who need to make like sprite sheets and stuff like that, because if you build your character into 3D and you have the ability to render out these kind of like low bit pixelated sprite kind of characters, you can pick the angle you want and just render out whichever frames you want. So let me just go over how I got to this endpoint of being able to get pixel art and rendering out straight from and saving it straight from Cinema 4D. So the first thing I'm going to cover is the little mushroom guy. So we have just a scene with the mushroom, and we have our 3-point lighting, we have our HDI studio rig, we got the nice reflections, nice specular, nice reflections, all that kind of good stuff. So the main thing is going to be all in the rendering. So for my purposes, I'm going to be rendering out at 800 by 600, but whatever starting point you're going to start from or want to render out at, it's important you make sure what that is. So mine's just going to be 800 by 600. This is like the size that Dribble likes, and I like posting to Dribble, so this is kind of the default for me. But what we're going to do is, typically when you render out, you want nice soft edges, but in this workflow, we don't want any anti-aliasing at all. We don't want the filter to be soft. We don't want any soft edges. We want sharp, pixelated edges. So what we're going to do to get that is turning anti-aliasing completely off. And you're going to notice once I do that, it actually creates a pretty cool kind of look. Like a pretty cool kind of style where we just have really pixelated edges you can see around my object here. And the other key is going to be to render this out at a lower resolution or a lower size, a smaller size than what we want this to be at. So ultimately we want to render out an image that's 800 by 600, but really we only want to render out at a smaller ratio than what we have here. So let me kind of demonstrate how we can actually do this. So let's just start by rendering this at half res. So I'm just going to divide by 2, and that's going to automatically divide my width and height by 2. So we got 400 by 300 from our original 800 by 600, and since we have lock ratio, that's always it's gonna lock the width and height ratio we have going on. And then we're just going to render it. I'm not going to save this anywhere because where we're going to actually be doing the saving is from the picture viewer. So I'm just going to go and say render to picture viewer. And actually, let's just render out a current frame right now. So we'll just render out frame 0 and render out to picture viewer. And here we go. So this is 100% view. Now, what I like to use the picture viewer for is to see what this is going to look like back at that original 800 by 600. So to get back to see what that final image is going to look like, I'm going to need to divide my viewer by 2 or crank this up to 200% scale to actually get back to that 800 by 600. Because we divided by 2, we need to upscale and double it. So when we render out at 800 by 600, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to have some pixelated edges here. The pixels aren't that big right now, so it's stylized, but you might want to push this even further and get even more pixelated action. So we can actually do that by, let's say, dividing this by 2 even more. So the total we have here is we've started from 800 by 600. We basically divided by 4, right? So if we render this out, to get back to that 800 by 600, we need to then scale this up even more. So we need to scale this up 4 times the original. So that's 400%. And you can start to see that now we're back at the 800 by 600, and we have an even more pixelated image, and it's looking pretty cool. So we can push this even further and say divide this 800 by 600 by 10, right? So we're going to make this very small. So we just divided it by 10, rendered a picture viewer, and again, we're going to multiply the scale by 10. So instead of 100%, we're actually going to 1,000 because we multiplied by 10, and there we go. Now we have a really pixelated kind of object going on here. And this kind of, this reminds me more of like, Sega Genesis or something like that. And I'll actually render this out as a animation. You can see how fast this is rendering out due to the fact that we have no aliasing, and we're rendering out such a tiny composition. So this is like super easy to experiment and see different sizes and what they look like. So again, we brought this up to 1,000% to get back to our 800 by 600 size. But if we actually save this anywhere, really the image is going to be saved is going to be this 800 or this 80 by 60. So how do we get this scaled size rendered out straight from Cinema 4D without having to go into, say, Photoshop or After Effects and just manually scaling stuff up here or in there? And what we can do is just do it, scale up, rescale it directly inside of our picture viewer. So when you render out an animation, we have a folder, and that folder is going to contain all of our frames. So what we can do is if I right click on that folder and go to Save As, we have an option to save this any way we want. So we can change the format. We can say if we want to do a still image or animation. And since we have an animation, I'm going to choose animation, or we can do selected frames if we want. And then we can change the format to anything we want. And I'm just going to go with a QuickTime Movie. We can go in options and kind of change compression and all this good stuff, but I'm going to leave that alone. And then we can, change the frames for a second here. We can change from and to, like what frames we want to go to. But the main thing that is going to be the most important thing is this rescale. This holds the key. So by default, it just wants to use the original, whatever we just rendered out. So this 80 by 60. So just like we did in the picture viewer, we just want to bring back to our original composition width that we actually want to render this out at to begin with, which is that 800 by 600. So we have lock ratio set. So all I have to do is add a 0 there. And since the lock ratio is there, it's going to multiply the height by 10 too. So we're getting back to our original size, or the size that we want to actually have rendered at to begin with. That is viewed right here. This is times 10. This is our 800 by 600 size. And if we hit OK, I'm going to save this as mushroom 800 by 600. And if I save this out, just wait for it, and let me open this up in QuickTime, and you can see that we just saved out a QuickTime movie that is 800 by 600 that has this awesome pixelated look to it. So that's how we can get a pixelated render directly from Cinema 4D, which is awesome because, again, you don't have to add more steps. You don't have to render this out and bring it in After Effects and scale up from there. So, and again, we can see just how great this is, because if we scale this up even more, look, there's no blurring of edges. So we can render this out as high as we want, and it's going to be sharp edges because of the fact that we have no aliasing whatsoever. So that, or we have no anti-aliasing whatsoever. So it's going to be sharp all the time, which is really, really awesome and really key. So this is the workflow for something like this. We have, again, we just have normal shading, but what if we want to flatten this? What if we want to make this like NES quality, like flat colors? We're not using a lot of color data or anything like that. Well, here is our little robot dude. And if you know me, you know I love me some Cel Shader and some Sketch and Toon. If you don't know about those two things, be sure to catch some tutorials. I'll link to them in the tutorial description for this. But basically, using the Cel Shader, we can apply flat shading to our 3D objects. So we have a limited color palette, and what we can do is use Cel Shader, use Sketch and Toon to render out an even more simplified pixelated image. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to turn off the save because, again, we're not saving from here. We're going to save from the picture viewer. So our output, again, is 800 by 600. And I'm just going to do current frame for now. And again, anti-aliasing, we're going to turn it off. No anti-aliasing. And everything else is good. So now we kind of decide how low do we want to make this, right? So let's start out by dividing this by like 4. So 200 by 150. And we'll render the picture viewer. And since we divided by 4, this will be 400% to get back to our 800 by 600 view, and that actually looks pretty dang good. Let's see if we can push this even more. So let's just divide this by 2 again. So 100 by 75. We'll render the picture viewer, and I think we need to crank that up 8 times, and you can see just how pixelated this is and how much we actually lose a lot of the details. So it's this fine line between size and kind of just maintaining the fidelity of your image or the details in your original image. So I like 400%. Let's just try. Let's see. So that was divided by 4. Let's divide by 2 and see what that looks like. Or actually, let's do that. Render, and this is 200%. So that looks kind of cool too. So this, again, like PlayStation 1 kind of quality. So this all has really cool looks, and it all depends on what kind of style or how pixelated you want your image to be. So again, if we wanted to save this, we can go through here and see the differences again between all those different pixelation quality sizes, and we'll just save as. And again, we just want to rescale this back up to our original 800 by 600. Hit OK, and we'll save this. Hold on, I have to save this as an image, so it's a still image. We'll save this as a PNG. Perfect. Rescale. Yep. And save. We'll replace that. And now I can open this up in my preview, and you can see exactly what we have in the picture viewer we have as a final rendered image. So picture viewer is very, very handy when it comes to this kind of stuff. So that's with Cel Shader. We can also add outlines because we have Sketch and Toon, so we can add some fun little outlines to our composition, and we can actually see what this looks like. Let's try 250. See, then we got an even number or an uneven number, so let's do 200 by 150. And because we changed the resolution and kind of thickened our stroke, because a thickness of 3 might seem small, but when your composition is small, your stroke's actually pretty big. So we need to shrink this down a little bit. Maybe 1.5, just thicken it just a little bit more. And we'll render this out and see what this looks like. So we divided by 4. So we've got 400, and now we're back to our 800 by 600 size. And that looks pretty good. So this is all well and good if you have the full version of Cinema 4D, but if you have Cinema 4D Lite, the main problem you're going to run into is that, number one, your render ratio limit's going to be limited to 800 by 600 to begin with. So it's actually good that I've been showing this at 800 by 600 because Cinema 4D Lite can't go any higher than that. That's kind of the limitation of having the free version. But the other major limitation is the fact that in Cinema 4D Lite, you do not have this right-click and save as option. So what you'll have to do is just render out from Cinema 4D, render out an MOV file or a PNG or whatever you need, and we can actually do a similar workflow inside of After Effects and get this kind of pixelated look. So I'm going to jump into After Effects here, and here we are, and here's kind of a recreation of the pixelated effect that I did with using effects inside of After Effects. So let me just go through this process. So I'm going to create a new composition. So this is my render from Cinema 4D. So this could have been from Cinema 4D Lite. The key is no matter if you're using Cinema 4D Lite or the full version, you want to render out without any anti-aliasing because we need those sharp edges. So first thing we want to do to pixelate this is to, and you know, a lot of people, they'll go to Mosaic, and Mosaic kind of creates a nice pixelated type of look here fairly easily. But the thing is the one thing that I don't like is the fact that you have to make sure your pixel ratio or your horizontal and vertical block ratio kind of matches to have perfect squares, and you can kind of fudge it and get close enough. But remember, we started at 800 by 600, so we can do like we can divide this by, let's divide this by 5. So divide by 5, and then we'll divide the vertical blocks by 5, and that's kind of the way you can do it, and that's all well and good. We can stick with that, or we can go another route and use something totally different. I'm going to turn this off, and the other option we can use is CC ball action. I heard you giggle. And you can already see some kind of pixelation going. I'm going to increase the ball size. I'm going to reduce the grid spacing. You can see that we have some nice pixelation happening, and the thing with the ball, with CC ball action, is you don't have to worry about the ratio of horizontal to vertical blocks because it just kind of pixelates everything in a grid pattern. So this is kind of the one upside of using ball action, is you don't have to manually do that. So we can go down to grid spacing 1. Let's see if it does 1.5. Now it looks like 2. So I don't know if you can actually see this in the compression, but with the ball action, we actually have the way the CC ball action works is we have a little bit of diffuse on all of these little balls, so it actually leaves, no matter how big the ball size is, we have a slight grid created by the diffuse on those individual balls. So to actually get rid of that, we need to kind of simplify our colors to remove all those little grid details. So the thing I like to use is Cartoon, the stylize effect, and I'll apply that, and by default it adds fill and edges, and we don't need edges, we just need the fill. And what that's going to do is simplify our color palette, just like you know, Cel Shader does in Cinema 4D. And then we just kind of removed that grid. We can adjust all this kind of stuff here and get the pixel size the way we want it to look. We're just going to make sure that the ball size is big enough that we don't see that grid anymore. And we can up the smoothness here to really sharpen things here. Let's go down to 2. So what if we want to scale this up? Right? What if we want to actually make our little robot dude bigger, and we don't want to go back into Cinema and render out at a larger size? Well, what we can do is go into our effect, go into distort, detail, preserving upscale, and why I use this is because if we just scale the layer, we get some soft edges, and we don't want soft edges at all. So that's where the detail preserving upscale comes in. And the key here is I'm going to apply it before I'm going to apply it first in my effects stack. So I'm going to turn that on, and now we can just scale that up. And you can see that because we have that first, and then we're kind of pixelating it with the ball action, and then adding that cartoon effect, we still maintain some decent edge fidelity here, which is nice. We can increase that ball size a little bit and see if we can get rid of some of this jankiness. But this is kind of what the workflow that I use. We can see if we can turn the detail down, and that kind of remove some of the janky edges here. And actually just turning this to detail preserving upscale kind of removes some of that stuff too. You can see if reduce noise helps, and it should. So that removes that even further. So with that, we have a nice blown up pixelated image. We can make it even more pixelated here and kind of adjust this size to whatever we want. So those are kind of the two ways. So using mosaic and using the CC ball action with cartoon and the detail preserving upscale is how I like to, if you have just Cinema 4D Lite and After Effects, this is the route you would go, is rendering out an animation or a still from Cinema 4D Lite, and again, you're limited to that 800 by 600, so that's where this detail preserving upscale will come in handy, because you can then upscale this to whatever size you need. So if you need to upscale to 1280 by 720 or full HD 1920 by 1080, this is a really good workflow for that. So with all that being said, that's kind of how my workflow was for creating cool pixel art using Cinema 4D, using no aliasing at all, and rendering from the picture viewer to really easily and quickly getting pixel art out of your 3D art. So if you have any questions, be sure to throw them in the comments section. I'll do my best to try to answer them. But this is a fairly straightforward workflow. But I'd really love to see what you guys come up with. I'm ready to see all of your guys' pixel art, so be sure to share it. Love it when people share their work with me. And that's going to be it for me. So happy 8-bitting and pixel arting away. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial, alright? Bye, everybody.